High-value employees have become the path of least resistance and a key source of compromise for corporations. Attacks against executives can compromise their personal accounts, enable corporate breaches, and can even compromise their reputation, wealth, and physical security. Black Cloak understands that an executive's personal digital footprint is crucial to enterprise security. We provide concierge cybersecurity solutions tailored for executives, safeguarding their personal data, devices, and online presence. Experience peace of mind knowing that your team is protected with Black Cloak Digital Executive Protection. Secure your digital life with blackcloak.io. Visit us now at securityweekly.com/blackcloak. Enterprises today are using hundreds of SaaS applications. Are you reaping their productivity and innovation benefits, or are you lost in the sprawl? Enter SaaS Security. They help you surface every SaaS app, identity, and risk, so you can shine a light on shadow IT and risky identities. Savvy monitors your entire SaaS attack surface to help you efficiently eliminate toxic risk combinations and prevent attacks. So go on. Get savvy about SaaS and harness the productivity benefits. Fuel innovation while closing security gaps. Visit securityweekly.com/savvy to learn more.
Created in 2005 and hosted by security industry veterans, Paul's Security Weekly is your source for in-depth coverage of the latest vulnerabilities, exploits, and security research. Our weekly security news discussion dives deep into the security issues we face today and potential solutions in a fun and lively atmosphere. Each week, we bring on guests from the security community to learn about their journey and discuss topics relevant to their work and research. You can also subscribe to our show by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe or look for Paul's Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher. We've recorded a ton of content over the years, so we created Spotify playlists featuring some of our favorite episodes, including interviews with Marcus Random, John McAfee, and Chris Roberts, to name a few. You can find them at securityweekly.com/starter packs.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque. Follow Security Weekly Productions on LinkedIn for exclusive show clips, insights, and updates across our organization. Stay connected with our hosts and fellow community members and join the conversation that's shaping the future of cybersecurity. Guy Guzner is a co-founder and the chief executive officer at Savvy. He has over 25 years of experience with network security products and began his career managing large product teams in engineering and security with Checkpoint Software Technologies. While working at Checkpoint Software, Guy built security product strategies and led the development lifecycle of a successful product portfolio with over $1.5 billion in annual revenue. Guy, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
We're going to talk about one of my favorite topics. Everybody on this show knows I am an app user data guy. And we're going to cover at least two of those three topics. We might actually talk a little bit about data as well. But obviously, the proliferation of SaaS-based applications, the pandemic that kind of pushed us into more cloud services has really created this really interesting dynamic of where our applications are no longer in data centers anymore. They're primarily outside the perimeter. We've talked about how the perimeter has just been eroding over the years, but the pandemic kind of accelerated it to the point today where identity is probably one of the primary perimeter points, right? Isn't it? With the application?
I would agree. I would say there is no actual perimeter anymore. I started Savvy almost 3 years ago. We don't have a perimeter. It's a pure cloud SaaS company. We never bothered to create a perimeter, and I think this is where businesses are going all over the world. So everything is in the cloud. Everything is SaaS-based. We're a small company. We use tens of different applications, and it's just growing more and more.
Yeah, but it also creates, I've been at two since the pandemic that are in the same boat, right? No data centers, no perimeter. Barely even an office, by the way, right? I think both of them have had offices, but if anybody's there on a regular basis, it doesn't matter, right? There's nothing there. But then what you have then is this really interesting dynamic of how do you manage access across all these SaaS-based applications in a way that you can understand who has access, how do you lock down access when people leave? Like it's created this really interesting identity problem, I think, and how you access all these different diverse SaaS-based applications all over the place, doesn't it?
Yes, because I think that identity is in the end the key for everything. Because when you start and you go to an application or something, you need to use your identity to open the door. And sometimes that's the only thing that stands between you and the application and the data that is there. And the thing is that also identity is changing. I mean, it used to be in the past, you go to a company, you go to IT, they will provision an account in Active Directory, and you get that provision, and then they provision applications for you, and you need to wait a month until you get all your permissions, right? And only then you start working. Today, your identity is even in the cloud. You have your own private identity with Google or Microsoft, and you use, either Okta or something else, and you can just start using applications whenever someone provisioned your work email address, and that's it. You can start onboarding the application and start be productive immediately. But that's also the challenge.
Yeah, Guy. I mean, I was going to say, there's a huge risk these days because the enablement of shadow IT has grown exponentially, where organizations in their business units have become more autonomous to IT, where you could have a marketing organization go out, provision HubSpot on their own, right? For example, they could go out there, get a marketing automation suite on their own without any oversight from IT, and then decide 3 months later, you want to know what? We demoed this for a little while. It really didn't work for us. We may move on to another cloud platform. But what happens with those identities when they're stuck up there in HubSpot, right? And nobody knows about them. There's no visibility. There's no oversight. There's no governance. That becomes a huge risk. Shadow IT has grown exponentially because of this.
That's absolutely right. I think this is in the point where we need to consider saying this is not shadow IT anymore. It's not in the shadow. This is mainline IT. This is business managed IT. This is a business led IT. I mean, when we say shadow IT, that's like 10 years ago. Let's just block everything. Let not put it. But this is actually something good because it allows people to be more productive. You onboard this HubSpot, but maybe there's another platform that helps you to get more traction, and you use that. So I think it's a positive thing, and we need to adapt on how we think about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, let's use the legacy term shadow IT because it's a blind spot to the IT department. Right. Let's call it that. It's a blind spot versus shadow IT. Right.
Right. Absolutely agree.
And if look, we've heard the saying, right? If you don't know about it, how can you protect it, right? And it's, Jason, to your point, it's these blind spots that create a challenge. The other thing that I think is interesting in the identity space, Guy, is when we think about all the different identity markets, right? We're starting to see some consolidation a little bit. Thoma Bravo just keeps buying up identity companies, right? But I've always said, why do we have identity access companies and then single sign-on companies and then privilege access management companies, and then you have identity governance? Like, we created this, and I think I know the root of this. The root of this is identity wasn't owned by security for the longest time. It was owned by IT, right? And as identity has become an attack path, we saw this evolution of innovation in the identity space that created all these submarkets. But don't we have to think about all of those identity components holistically when we're trying to solve this problem?
You're absolutely right. I mean, identity wasn't part of security. In some places, it's still not part of security. And that's the problem because, like you said, when you had a perimeter, even if you didn't manage your identities and you didn't offboard users, but once they don't have physical or network access to the perimeter, even if those identities are still active, effectively there's no access. But now, as we said, everything in the cloud, if you don't manage those identities, if you don't know if people are misusing those identities, if you don't know if people are using compromised accounts or reusing their credentials, you are exposed. And I think this is the transition. This is the change that we're seeing, that security leaders care more and more about identities, because this is where what we see most of the breaches are coming from. I mean, if you look at the latest Verizon data breach incident report from 2023, 45% of the breaches involved using stolen credentials, more than any other attack vector, more than phishing, more than exploitation, more than anything else.
Yeah. It is the biggest problem. It has been for 15, 16, 20 years, maybe
30.
Yeah, no doubt. And you know, just pulling on that thread, you know, we have these autonomous departments now. They can go out and they can provision systems. You know, one of the biggest challenges for security teams now is keeping oversight on third-party risk. Now that creates an even deeper level of blind spot when you have an autonomous business unit who could be partnering with a third party, creating identities, credentials for them in these systems. What does that do to your third-party vendor risk management now?
This is where it becomes even more challenging, because all those platforms are built for collaboration. You're using some collaboration platform and you want to share some files with a partner, you can provision them into your systems. Or sometimes you work with a partner and they provision your employees into a third-party system you don't manage. So it's a mesh of different identities and different applications that are all connected together. And today, you know, the standards allow also connecting one application to the other. You say, oh, this is great. I want to connect my OneDrive to, you said, HubSpot or something like that, and pull the data directly from there. I can delegate my identity to do that in my behalf. And then you got a third-party application that has access to a secure, sensitive application without you knowing about it.
Right. And then again, pulling more on the thread, we all know that, you know, business units are great of bringing in third parties and bringing in people into the environment, bringing in new employees into the environment. Well, what about offboarding them when they're no longer connected to the organization? That's a problem already in the traditional aspect. Never mind now with this more complicated, SaaS model where we have autonomous business units kind of managing their own side of the business with their own applications. User offboarding now becomes more complicated, right?
Absolutely. And I've seen challenges with completely offboarding users in any organization I worked with because of this complexity. And that also relates to the fact that it's a lot about human nature. People will ask for access. If you need something for work and you don't have access, you will open a ticket. You will call IT and yell on them. But and you get the access. But then if you no longer need that access, you move to a different role. You do something else. You ever call someone and say, oh, please remove something, you gave me access 6 months ago? No, you never do that. I don't do that. So this is why you always have over-provisioned access and always a challenge with offboarding, because nobody really cares about it in the end, maybe except, security that has to chase all that.
So, Guy, we've set up the problem pretty well, right? It's challenging, and it's probably only going to get worse. How do we think about managing our identities and our SaaS access in a way that makes it easier to manage? How do you solve for this? I mean, obviously you created a company to solve aspects of this. How should we be thinking about this? How do we solve some of these complexities and challenges?
Well, I think that first we need to accept that this is the situation, and you can fight it, and you can say, oh, well, I will still use the traditional paradigm that I will centrally manage everything, and I will have a policy that it's allow or block. And this is relating to the shadow IT. So I will block everything, and we will just use the business approved applications. We need to forget about this approach, but then not go all the other way and say, well, let's just open everything and accept the risk and hope nothing bad happens. So we need to find a middle path where you are enabling the business and the workforce and the users to onboard applications and get things done, but provide certain guardrails when they do that. So they do this within an acceptable policy of not reusing their credentials in different places, of implementing safe access using multi-factor authentication, of having basic hygiene best practices when they use these identities, and be able to make those decisions about them in a way that is not intrusive to their work process.
So does that mean I augment my existing authentication mechanisms like Azure AD and Google? Do I replace it? I'm just curious, like, because I mean, we've proliferated the old school way for so long, right? We either use AD or we're using our Google accounts to authenticate to everything today. Do we now have to put a layer of security protections on top of that? Or do we replace that with something else that gives us more the middle ground and moves us away from some of the traditional mechanisms?
I don't think you remove those identity providers, and they're still there, and you will be using Google, and you will be using Microsoft, and you will be using identities provisioned by different applications, but you need some kind of a solution that is aware of all these identities and how they play together, keeps tracks of them and who is using them, and is able to orchestrate whenever you need to make changes, like offboarding someone, or when you discover someone is using some compromised credentials, or when someone is doing violation, using those services. It's just another layer that is there to verify that they are being used in an effective way. And I can tell you that we also found that in places where people thought, oh, we already managed this application, we got it federated, and all the access is using single sign-on and multi-factor authentication. But then we found out, hey, there's still people accessing this application directly. And then you find out, oh, people made exception in the policy, misconfigured the application. So how do you verify that those identity providers are doing what you think that they're doing? I mean, you don't want all the eggs to be in one basket here.
And honestly, let's not kid ourselves. I mean, I know many organizations that are not just using one identity provider. Remember, business units are autonomous, right? So I know many organizations that have Azure Active Directory or Entra now, right? And they also have part of their business that's in AWS, and they're operating out of AWS or GCP. So, either we're going to have to be beholden to going out to every single one of those identity providers and trying to find a solution there, where I think a better methodology would be, let's have an umbrella oversight across all of those identity providers that we use within the business. So we have that centralized visibility and no blind spots, right? Because the more identity providers you have, the more blind spots you're going to get. So, having that overarching visibility across all of them, I think is important.
Yeah. And I think it's also understanding, like, you almost have to manage the inventory of identities and the SaaS apps, right? Like, that's a blind spot, I would imagine, right, Guy? Because you're thinking about, it's not only just the identities and not just the SaaS apps. It's the interrelationship of those identities and those SaaS applications, and understanding who has access to what, so that I can automate and remove permissions or access to certain systems in a more automated way. But that means you have to tie identities and SaaS apps together and manage that holistically. It's not one or the other. It's the combination of both, right?
Exactly. And in the end, what you care about, and this is what you started with, it's the combination. It's identity, application, and the data that is accessible by this application. So we call this, how do you find the toxic combinations? Because what you care about is when someone is using unmanaged applications in an unsafe way, and that application contains sensitive data. This is where breaches are coming from. So you need to care about all of these things and be able to map those combinations so you're able to manage that risk effectively.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, you just brought my triad together in a beautiful way. Are you constantly then analyzing over those connections to kind of identify where those potential toxic connections are? Because that's the challenge for organizations, right? Because if they don't even understand the connectivity, analyzing all that data at a very large organization would be difficult to like say, hey, by the way, did you know that you've got sensitive data sitting in this application accessible by these individuals? Are you sure you really want that? Right? Like you have to analyze those connections too.
Exactly, and that's what we're trying to do, is to create this inventory of all the identities and the applications and what kind of data that they have. What are the relationships with those applications? Which application has access to which kind of data? And I think that what even makes it even a bigger challenge today is when you think about Gen AI, is because it's kind of fueling more innovation in SaaS. Maybe that's the driver of why do you want to use a new application, because it is AI enabled. And then you need to think about, if someone has access to this application and I don't manage that access, and that application is using a language model, what happens next? That makes it even a bigger challenge today. And that's why you need to care about those combinations at scale.
And I think that's a huge gap today with your more traditional DLP technologies, is they don't connect all that context together, right? So, being able to fill that gap now with the way business is working today in a modern environment, you could be born in the cloud as a business. So, traditional DLP technologies aren't gonna fill that gap. Being able to connect those dots and create that context across user data, right, and in the application itself, I think that's huge visibility.
Yeah, I mean, if we talk about DLP technologies, and I got still some scars from building DLP products, it is painful. And I think that always the challenge was there is sensitive information. People need to deal with sensitive information. What is missing is the understanding of the business context of where do you use this sensitive information, by whom, for how long, what is the purpose. And there is some risk that you need to be able to accept by processing this information. I mean, if you just say, I will detect anything sensitive going out and I will just block it, most companies will not be able to do any business in today's environment.
Right. And then as a leader, you'll have a shelf life, because when you're not enabling a business, you're a roadblock to the business, and you disappear real quick when you're a roadblock.
Exactly. And then it becomes just shelfware that you don't really use, or maybe you just use for monitoring. You get thousands of alerts and you don't even bother to look through them.
Which is what's happened with most of the DLP solutions that have been built. They're shelfware. All right. So Guy, we got the problem. We know kind of how we need to solve this. How do you get started? Like, where should people start? Because this is a potentially massive problem to solve in some organizations. Like, how would you recommend to them? How do you start down this path of building these connections, identity, app to data connections? Because look, we're all horrible at asset management. We're just horrible. right? We don't have a good asset repository. We don't know where all this stuff is. So how do you start to identify where this stuff is? What should people be doing to get their arms around this?
Well, I think that's exactly the problem that we're trying to solve with Savvy. And the first thing that we normally do with customers, and we say, let's do a discovery. And when we do discovery, we use multiple ways to discover all those different identities, different applications, the data that is being done with this application, and just map everything into an inventory. And then start from there. Understand what is the risk profile for different applications, for different users in the organization, because also what we learn is that some people are more risk prone than others. Some will just onboard every new application out there and will just try out everything and maybe and will not adhere to the security guidelines, where others don't. So it's first understanding where are those risks, and once you map them, only then you're able to act upon that.
Right. So discovery builds the initial inventory of connections. Then what do? Do you analyze that to look for risk areas? Do you start with applying policies to, like, what's the kind of the next step? Because I could see it going a couple different ways.
So the next step, and in order not to make that overwhelming, I mean, the easiest thing is let's just generate thousands of alerts, and then you become another one of those products we just mentioned, and yeah, that's great. It's about finding the most important things, the things that we talked about, the toxic combinations. Because when we think about the risk for a breach, normally you need several factors that are points of failure to have the breach, more than one. So once you identify those major toxic combinations, this is where you have some priorities of what are the things that we want to start addressing, and then create some policies and automate them in scale, so you're able to solve those combinations.
So Guy, what you're saying is there's a period of baselining that you have to do. You have to be analyzing the data, reviewing the data, finding those toxic combinations, and after a period of time of baselining the behavior of everything that's going on, then you start the execution of automations and remediations and those things.
Exactly. And it's a cycle. I mean, you do continuous discovery and then you have some findings. You start addressing those findings by implementing some playbooks and automations to deal with them. And you see that they are effective, and then you go on and you find the next one. And because things are so dynamic, and we've seen people adapting new platforms, like you say, let's say, we don't use HubSpot, we use something else. It's not enough to do it just one time, or even let's do an annual security review for the audit. It's something that needs to be done continuously, because that's how IT works now. It's you can onboard an application in a matter of seconds. So you need a solution that is able to track that also in a matter of seconds.
So there's constant tuning involved.
Yep.
Well, there's constant change involved. I mean, you're adding new apps, you're removing apps, you're adding users, you're removing users. If you don't have some automation around this, you'll never stay ahead of it, right? You're just going to continue to compound the problem.
Yep.
Jason, any more questions for Guy while we have it?
Oh, good to go. This has been awesome. It's great overview.
Guy, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Thank you very much, guys. It was a pleasure to be here.
To learn how to protect your SaaS applications, please visit securityweekly.com/savvy. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening today. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.